One of my hobbies growing up as a teenager was bodyboarding. So that's a way in which you ride waves in the beach. And I remember that when I joined seminary, one of the things that I missed the most was bodyboarding and spending time in the waves during the summer. But in seminary, we were fortunate enough that almost every year after Easter, we had the chance to go to the beach for a few days. So after a few years in seminary, I heard that we were going to the beach, so I said, I'm going to go bodyboarding again for good old time's sake. So I got my equipment ready, and we went to the beach. And maybe you guys know this, but Easter always aligns with full moon. And do you guys know what full moon does to the waves? The waves get bigger, right? During full moon. So I remember walking to the beach with the other seminarians, and I was the only one ready to bodyboard. So I got to the shore, and I was terrified. The waves were very big, and this was a different beach where I had never surfed. But I was there with my equipment. So the other seminarian was like, so show us what you got. And I, typical male reasoning, I can't chicken out. So I went in and I started paddling into the ocean. But waves come in sets, right? So what you do is you go in when the sets aren't coming, but when the water is calm, you have to be sure that you position yourself in enough so that when the set breaks, you can ride the wave rather than having the wave crash in front of you. But I was terrified. So I was undecisive. So I came in, but I didn't position myself deep enough in the ocean. So guess what happened? I see in the horizon a huge wave forming, right? I think it was 6, 8 feet maybe. So I was paralyzed, because when you're scared, you're paralyzed, because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should paddle in to try to go over the wave, or if I should paddle out so the wave would break. So I just stood there. And what happened is the wave broke a feet away from me. So what is it that you do when the wave breaks in front of you? Normally what you do, if the wave is too big, you throw the board and you dive as deep as you can so you kind of like go under the wave that's breaking. I forgot all this. So the wave broke in front of me and I was like, ah! And the other thing that you do is that when you're being wiped by a wave, your first reaction is you want to fight against the wipe and you want to get to the surface as soon as you can, but that's the worst thing you can do. Because if the wave is big, you can't fight when you're being wiped. You just have to let yourself go. So you save energy and oxygen, and then you go out. But I knew all the theory. But in the moment, I forgot all the theory. To make matters even worse, as soon as the wave broke and I was being wiped, the leash of the board broke, the fin escaped my feet, and I was being wiped really bad. I was thinking about the brother that was in the shore and was seeing the board being washed out into the shore. So as soon as I was finished being wiped out by the first wave, I came out to surface. But waves come in sets, right? So what happened as soon as I got into the surface? The second wave breaks right in front of me. And I tell you honestly, I was totally terrified. I was being wiped again. I was fighting against the wave. I didn't dive deep. I was trying to go into the surface, and I got pulled down by the current or by just by the force of the wave. And in that moment, I told myself, this is it. I thought to myself, good thing I'm confessed. But I thought I was going to die that day. I honestly thought that my life was going to end. I survived that second wave, that second wipe out by the wave. And only by God's grace there wasn't a third or fourth wave in the set, because normally waves in sets come in groups of 5 or 6. So by God's grace, my life was spared, and after that second wave where I was wiped, I could barely make it to shore. What did I learn that day? What did I get to experience firsthand? I got to experience that although the ocean and the water is beautiful and admirable, there's something violent and there's a power of death in water. Water has a power of death and destruction. And if you look at scriptures, you can see this throughout scriptures. For example, when God wanted to wipe out sin from the world, how did he do it? He did it through water, through the flood. Water is a power of destruction in Scripture. When the Israelites are running away from the Egyptians and they make it to the Red Sea, isn't it true that in the Red Sea, water proves to be a power of destruction? Doesn't water crush the Egyptians? When the prophet is running away from his vocation, and when the prophet Jonah goes into the sea, running away from his vocation, running away from Nineveh, isn't it true that the water and its power of destruction makes him be tossed into the water by his fellow sailors? So we can see without a doubt in my own life and in the testimony of scriptures that water is life, and water is beautiful, but also water is a power of destruction. That is why when we're baptized, we go into water, because we're destroying our old self and we're dying to our old self. But at the same time, you know what's also true in scriptures? That no matter how violent water is, the only being that has power over water is God. The only being that can exercise authority, the only being that can exercise his will over water is God himself. God is the only being that can exercise control over it. And that is why today in the scene of the gospel, when Jesus is walking over water, the disciples are amazed by it, and they are terrified. Because they know that the only one that can have exercise of power over water is God himself. And that is why if we want to understand this scene of the gospel, we have to see that this scene is a theophany. What is a theophany? A theophany is when the invisible God makes himself in some way visible and his presence becomes palpable and touchable and near. Today, what Jesus is showing in walking over water is that he's not only a prophet, he's not only a good and inspired man, he's proving to his disciples that alike God, he has power over what seems to be wild and destructive and violent. He has power over water like God himself. And in case what I'm saying doesn't seem convincing enough, there are two other details in the scene that really reveals Jesus is making a statement about who he is. When the disciples are screaming in the boat, what does Jesus say to them? He says, "Do not be afraid. It is I." Where do we hear this expression, "It is I"? It's the expression in the book of Exodus, when Moses goes to the desert and the burning bush says, "Tell them that it is I." Jesus is claiming the divine name for himself. This whole scene can only be understood as a proclamation of Christ's own divinity. So let me finish this homily with two practical applications, two ways that we can bring this to our life. The first one, Once the disciples recognize who Jesus is and Jesus comes into the boat, how does the scene end? The text says the disciples made him homage. They recognized who he was. They prostrate before him. They make him do homage. I want to give you a reminder, something that the church teaches. The church teaches when we come to the Eucharist, when we come to Mass, we should treat God with the same reverence and we should do homage to him in the same way that the disciples did. And the church says when you come to receive communion, you can receive communion in two ways, kneeling or standing. And the church says if you're going to receive communion standing, you always have to bow before receiving communion. And I think in this indication, what the church is saying, always remember to give Christ homage in the Eucharist. Always make sense of who is it that you're receiving. So my first encouragement is, let us treat the Eucharist always with reverence, with devotion, with respect, even with a little fear. And the second application, I found this phrase that I think it's very fitting to today's gospel. The phrase goes like this: don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big your God is. Let me repeat this. Don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big God is. And I'm saying all this because this scene reminds us that there is no storm that is not under God's control or power. There is no wave too big that exceeds God's authority over it. So this week, let's let God be God in our lives. Let us remind ourselves that He is the one that has power over every storm.